computer. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Planet's FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name's Suj.
Go on.
I was going to say, this is, you come in
James.
there, James. And today is the People's Poll, the show each and every week where we discuss a topic of your choosing. We put a poll out on Sundays, A, B, C, or D. We let the public decide. Normally, we don't try and bias the vote. This week, we did. And it didn't count for anything because it didn't help in any way, shape, or form. James, what were the options and what got chosen? And if my background on the YouTube isn't a giveaway of what we're talking about, then I don't know what is.
So we put in the joint runners-up from the previous week, which included the one that Suj really wanted to do, which was a best ever Premier League team based of having no European players. I think Suj really wanted to have the debate out of Salah versus Mane versus Sanchez versus Son versus Aguero, etc., etc. But of the two that were runners up, it didn't even get the most votes to them, mate. One club, Premier League men, which we were going to define as a minimum of 10 years service and played for only one club in the Premier League, also didn't win the vote. Somebody sent in, it might have been Brad Lewandon, which is going to sound stupid now if it wasn't Brad. But somebody sent an idea into my Friday Suj James stream about Premier League managers. And I kind of expanded on that to the idea of what would be the best ever team that we could put together of people that have managed in the Premier League. The winner of the vote, and when I put it into the vote myself, it seemed a lot easier than it has been, was the idea of picking an England team based on players that have never actually won a cap for England. If I could have done it again, I would have done it as one cap wonders, mate.
Yeah, I was going to say, because there's like a bunch of players that picked up the odd cap, which rules them out of the reckoning for this. And yet then you've got obviously all of these players that didn't get a cap for England. And so we've got a 11 plus notable mentions of players that we put together, or you put together the bulk of it. But in my research and the stuff that we looked at, we're not too far apart, mate. Of players that never actually managed to get a cap for England at all. And for the listeners who'll be curious about the likes of, I don't know, current players, like, has Wan-Bissaka got a cap yet? Probably not. We're not talking about current players that are still playing that might be like 20-year-old wonder kids. It doesn't make sense, right? These are players that have finished their careers and didn't get a cap in the past. If they're still playing, there's a chance that they might get that cap.
I don't think it was a case of ruling out current players, but for example,
Mark Noble.
Yeah.
He's not going back in.
Mark Noble's not in it. He's probably on a short list, but he's not in this team. But more say Jack Grealish. I mean, if Jack Grealish gets to the end of his career and hasn't won an England cap, he would get in this team.
Correct. But he's still too young right now.
That cap will come.
Yeah, I don't.
As long as he doesn't go to parties and shit like that.
I don't doubt that at all. Yeah. So there are a handful of players that are real givens in here, and then a few more obscure ones. I'm not too proud to admit there's a few players in here from the 60s and 70s that prior to putting this together, never even heard of. But a few that we may talk about that people will be surprised that they never got an England cap.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's start in goal. And you've put Tony Cotton in there.
Well, that's a good start. Suj, it's Tony Coton.
Coton.
We're going 3-4-3, by the way. Tony Coton was one of the goalkeepers I remember best from the early 90s when I started going to football. And he was a name that immediately sprung to mind to me because I felt like I recalled him being in England squads, but I couldn't recall him playing for England. And actually wasn't as many squads as I thought he was, although he had been in England squads and not started for the full national team. But around the area when the Premier League started, for me, he was one of the best keepers in the league. I didn't realise how much he played for Birmingham and Watford in the late 70s and all through the 80s prior to joining Manchester City in 1990. He won one England cap for the B team in 1992. He was called up a couple of times in 1993. He won his club's Player of the Year while he was at Birmingham, Watford and Manchester City on 6 separate occasions. He was obviously very much adored by his own club fans. I think there were two that was in competition for this and actually would have been of the same era, which were John Lukic of Leeds and Steve Ogrizovic of Coventry. I think both also might have had squad call-ups at times or another, but actually at that time, and obviously Lukic won the title in '92, so you think, oh, maybe he should have the nod, sorry. But in that same season, Tony Coton was in the PFA Team of the Year, and I think he was the better keeper at the time when those three keepers were probably all at their peak, and Coton was probably the closest to getting an England call-up, sort of at that time where it was transitioning between Chris Woods and David Seaman.
I would have said Ogrizovic was probably my favourite, mainly because I just like his name and I remember him from his Coventry days. Oggy would have been up there, followed by, for me, Lukic, because of that title-winning season, and I remember John Lukic better from the 90s. I don't have much memory of Tony Coton, but when you look at it, like for a goalkeeper to win Club Player of the Year, basically means that the defence was garbage and the keeper had to get him out of a lot of holes. With Fabianski's been our player of the season a couple of years, and he definitely was last season, and that's because he had to get us out of so much trouble. So when a keeper does win Player of the Year, it's because they've been busy and they've had a lot to do, right? You're never going to see a keeper win at City or Liverpool these days because they just don't work enough. And to be in the PFA Team of the Year, but not be England's number one, I think also says something. So I can't argue with it. This is one where your memories of football and then this kind of exercise, and then you look at the stats and the data, you have to marry the two up a little bit. So actually, you know what? I don't remember the football as much, but he did achieve this, and this, and then still didn't make it into the squad.
If you think of that year 91, 92, where he's been in the PFA Team of the Year, that was the summer before United had bought Schmeichel. Obviously, Arsenal had David Seaman, Leeds had Lukic, Chris Woods' Sheffield Wednesday finished third, and there was Tim Flowers at Southampton. So there was plenty, Nigel Martin at Crystal Palace. So there was plenty of competition knocking about, and his fellow peers voted him, right? I think that speaks volumes. The mark against him in comparison to, say, Lukic would be that there was no major honours in Coton's career. But I didn't actually realise, looking back further, like I said, I didn't realise how much he played for Watford in the 80s, and that was a very good Watford. At Watford, he played in goal in the 85 final. He was certainly at the club when they lost to Everton, but he was part of that team that featured, like, John Barnes, Luther Blissett. I think he was voted in second maybe to Watford's Hall of Fame or some sort of similar award thing that they have. So it wasn't even just at City as well. He was very impressive at Watford before that as well. So he got the nod. But then Lukic wasn't just at Leeds. Lukic won the title at Arsenal as well.
Arsenal.
It was in '89. So it was one of the tougher calls.
The defence, I don't have a problem with anyone in your defence. In fact, they're the three that I would have picked in defence as well, without a doubt. Let's start with Ron Chopper Harris.
Go on.
I was going to say even younger football fans will have heard of Ron Chopper Harris just because of the esteem he's held in at Chelsea. He is on that Hall of Fame list without a doubt. Record performance, 795 performances, and is always brought back in terms of conversation with Chelsea.
Yeah, to clarify, obviously we're going with a back three of three centre halves. It just weren't enough good choices in the fullback positions. I guess if you were good enough at fullback, you generally played. But Ron Chopper Harris, certainly a legend at Stamford Bridge. A total of 795 appearances for Chelsea, spanning over 19 years. Is quite an astonishing number, which I would suggest will never get beaten in Chelsea's history. He was in the 60s at the time. He was the youngest ever FA Cup final captain in 1967 when they lost to Spurs. He got appointed captain a couple of years after Terry Venables moved from Chelsea to Spurs. I don't know, by the way, it's just off topic slightly, if it's that little era where the Tottenham-Chelsea rivalry started from, because no Chelsea fans still can't tell me why they hate us so much. He got the nickname of Chopper, as did quite a few other players around that era. Tommy Smith at Liverpool and Norman Hunter, equally famous at Leeds. George Best once famously said that he could see Ron Harris in the background of every photo that was taken of him playing football. Basically, he was
Follow
never
him around.
Yeah, he was never going to be far away from him. He was going to get him. He
Yeah.
really was no prisoners. But in fairness, he could play as well. And I think the longevity to go from 1961 to 1980 and play that long. And obviously, during that period, Chelsea did have good sides. They won the FA Cup in 1970, beating Leeds in the final. Then they won the Cup Winners' Cup in 71. So he was captain at a period when people obviously joke about Chelsea, no history kind of prior to Abramovich and all that. But probably Chelsea's greatest side beyond the 21st century versions was that sort of like 1970 era. And he was captain of that side as well. So astonishing, really, that for whatever reason, Norman Hunter played plenty of times for England, but Ron Harris didn't.
And in the heart of it, we've got Stevie Bruce, now Newcastle manager. Never managed to get a cap for England. It's incredible when you think about the start of the Sir Alex Ferguson dynasty. For me, Bruce and Pallister were just stalwarts at centre-back. And for United, like the centre-back pairings and real good quality centre-halves, Rio Ferdinand, Vidic, Jaap Stam, Pallister himself, all following. And it all started back then with the Bruce and Pallister kind of partnership. Co-captained the side, lifted the title, but never made it into the England squad.
Yeah, really strange quirk. At that time, it was obviously very competitive with your likes of Tony Adams, a young Martin Keown, Des Walker, Gary Mobert at Spurs, Mark Wright at Derby, and then later on Liverpool. So England were quite blessed in that position at the time. And Pallister was the one who generally got the nod. I think Pallister played about 10 times for England or so, I think. Bruce was, in essence, he was quite late developing in the sense that I didn't realise how many times he played for Gillingham. He played over 200 times to Gillingham before he moved on to Norwich, then played about 150 odd games for Norwich before appearing for... I mean, you can't believe that an English player would play 300 times for Man United and not get an England call-up.
Mad.
Right? You just can't. But that would never happen now. And there's a theme here of players.
And it wasn't a crap United. It was a title-winning United.
Well, no, he was basically him and Brian Robson were. It was Brian Robson 92-93 was his last season at United. So Robson didn't play that often. Bruce was coming in as captain. He was. I mean, that team wasn't short of leaders, was it? With like your Paul Ince's, Mark Hughes, and Cantona, and later Roy Keane, obviously Schmeichel at the back, etc. It wasn't short of leaders, but Bruce was the leader of it. I think one of the things that might have really counted against him was his height. He wasn't short, but he wasn't that kind of imposing 6'3", 6'4" that a lot of centre halves, people like Tony Adams and that would have got favoured over that sort of thing. I mean, Adams was one of the best centre halves I've seen, certainly English anyway. But it's just a weird quirk that you just never get called up. I think, like when we put this out, people were even saying in the comments straight away, people thinking of Steve Bruce just naturally straight away. I think everybody remembers that, and you'd make an argument because of that he'd possibly be captain of this team if you were to pick one. Yeah, it's just such a weird quirk that he never played for England. He was good enough.
Definitely agree with you. And quite often now with so many friendlies, maybe there were fewer friendlies in those days.
Yeah, it's true.
Picked up cheap caps, if you know what I mean.
Well, the whole cheap cap thing, that was one of the problems. Because I thought when we looked at this, that there would have been players even in the noughties and that who would have slipped through the net who just didn't play for England. There's a handful. But it was far more common for really good players, for whatever reason, just to not get called up. He did even play for England, even when he was at Gillingham. He played at youth level for England 8 times. He got 1 England B cap. So it wasn't like he wasn't on people's radar. I don't think he was ever even in a squad search. Just remarkable.
Wow.
Before we move on, just a bit of trivia to keep people going. I'll do the answer at the end. But Steve Bruce has managed 11 clubs since he's become a manager. And every single one of them has been in the Premier League at some stage. He hasn't managed them all in the Premier League, but all 11 clubs that he's managed have been at the Premier League at one stage or another. I'll give you the answers for those 11 at the end.
Good. Next up at the back, we've got Billy Bonds, good old Hammer, record performances for West Ham as well. It's interesting that 2 of the back 3 have been the record appearances for their clubs. I suppose defenders don't get rotated as much as other players. But, Billy Bonds never made it into the England team.
I feel like I should leave this one to you a bit, Such, because he's obviously your boy with just under 800 appearances for West Ham.
800 games for West Ham. I think he played in
Incredible.
fullback, played in midfield, played at centre back, a bit of a utility player. But I think Billy Bonds probably suffered a little bit like Steve Bruce. He wasn't particularly glamorous in any way. Maybe like Mark Noble now as well. Does the basics, is a good player. Most football fans, even younger football fans, will know of a Billy Bonds, no doubt because he went on to manage West Ham as well. And so there's that affinity with the club. But actually, it doesn't surprise me as much that he didn't get into the England squad. I just think it didn't have the glamour to want to be an international footballer.
Maybe, but then his kind of peak era, which would have been sort of late 70s, early 80s when he was at his best, the centre-halves weren't really so fashionable in comparison to, say, some of those names I mentioned in the early 90s for England.
Yeah.
And unlike, say, Mark Noble, there are good stories, but behind why Billy Bonds didn't play for England, because he was bloody close a couple of times. Did have a couple of under-23 caps. It was more of an under-23 team rather than what we now know as a version of the under-21s. He was a substitute for England in the game against Italy in 1977. And he was earmarked to play against Brazil at the end of the season in 1981. And on the final day of the season, he had a collision with your goalkeeper and broke 2 ribs.
Ouch.
And so never played for England. And he would have basically played for Brazil, against Brazil for England in 1981. And they just never got another chance. I guess that was kind of an experimental stage where they wanted to look at a few players in the run-up to the World Cup in Spain the following summer, being the end of the season. I think Alvin Martin was earmarked to play as well. But Billy Bonds never got his chance and never got another look in. But, no. I mean, glorious history for your lot. I guess he's Hall of Fame number 1. One of your stands in a different postcode is named after him, isn't it?
It was indeed. It was indeed. Moving on to the midfield. So we've got 5 across the middle.
Four.
Oh,
We've changed
sorry.
it.
I thought you were playing a 3. So we're playing a 3-4-3 now, are we?
Yeah, we are, yeah.
Yeah, okay, let's do it. Howard Kendall.
People remember Howard Kendall more famously for obviously his managerial career.
I obviously he's in the 60s and 70s. I've got no playing memory of Howard Kendall or what he did or didn't achieve, to be honest.
He was manager for Everton, the title winning sides of 85 and 87, the cup winning team of 84. He's probably regarded just about as Everton's greatest ever manager. He did have a second spell late in the 90s, but when he left Everton the first time, he went to Athletic Bilbao and struggled with the restrictions of obviously only being able to buy Basque players. And before he came back, he was offered the Newcastle job before he then came back to Everton. I think he had managed Everton 3 times, didn't he? Before he came back the second time, he was strongly linked to taking over from Sir Bobby Robson for the England job following Italian 90. That job went to Graham Taylor, as a plug for Thursday's podcast there. But basically, I'm playing Kendall a little bit out of position near wide right midfield. He's really kind of a central midfield player, basically. He was the first 17-year-old to play in an FA Cup final in the 20th century. Considered part of the Holy Trinity midfield with Colin Harvey and Alan Ball, which won Everton the league title in 1970. He won caps at schoolboy level, youth level, under 23 level, and he was in several England squads, but never made an appearance for the first team.
And alongside him, you've put Kevin Nolan, more recently Kevin Nolan, also former West Ham. But
I feel like when you think of, I did kind of want to put someone in that was modern era, and I think when you think of 21st century and you think players who you think, they should have got an England call up. I mean, Kevin Davis is the other one, but Kevin Davis did make an appearance for England against Montenegro in about 2011, I think. Kevin Nolan was a few times, there were a lot of calls for him to be called up. And I guess because of the likes of Lampard, Gerrard, Scholes, I mean, Nolan doesn't compare to any of these players I'm talking about, of course not. But he was, particularly during Sam Allardyce's very good Bolton Wanderers side that had like a Kocher and Djorkaeff and that. This guy was a midfield goal-scoring phenomenon. I mean, he would have been an unbelievable FPL asset.
Yeah. It's why he's staying in my champ manager team at 4.5 million.
He's in mine, yeah.
Yeah, he's staying. He's unbelievable value at that. He had a couple of seasons where he was West Ham's top goal scorer. I mean, it doesn't say much about our attacking options at the time, but for a midfielder to be your top goal scorer says a lot. And he had a habit of getting into the box late, shoot from outside the box. An effective player, if not the prettiest, he was a very effective footballer.
Very good in the penalty area. Very
Ma-
good. Came alive.
Managerial career hasn't been as exciting, but I think he's the type of player. I wouldn't surprise me if he does do well.
No, I mean, from a managerial perspective, he's been unlucky with Notts County and Leyton Orient. He's managed. He's been a little bit unlucky from that perspective. I'm not sure if it's something that he's going to want to continue as he goes on, because I think he's found a frustrating start to his career with that. But he dived in very early on that with, I think it was Notts County was at first, wasn't it? He holds a very distinctive record, which I think made him a must for this team, Suj, in that he's got the most Premier League appearances by an Englishman without winning a cap.
Okay, fair play.
And that's 400 plus Premier League appearances. It's not like a small number. I think he's in the top 30 or 40 for Premier League appearances, I think.
Wow.
So I think although he wasn't the most glamorous of players, and compared to some of the others on this list, certainly doesn't have the technical qualities, I think there was a time where a lot of people did want him in that England squad. And I think he was unlucky to never get that call up.
Next, you've picked a Gooner.
Paul Davis at Arsenal, who was really unlucky in the later 80s and the early 90s because he suffered terribly from injuries. Obviously, played in that side with David Rocastle, who did play for England a number of times, who sadly lost his life about nearly 20 years ago now, I think, David Rocastle. I saw the anniversary for that was very recently. But he's another one, so you look at it and go, right, this guy played 450 times in midfield for Arsenal and never won an England cap. Can you just, these numbers are staggering to now. Now, if he made 4.5 appearances for Arsenal as an English midfielder, he'd be in the squad, mate.
Straight in the squad. I mean, Theo Walcott, you just think about Theo Walcott going to the World Cup up with Sven when he just kind of...
With no Arsenal appearances.
Just was born.
He was part of the 89 title winning season, but suffered quite a bit that year with injuries. And he kind of missed out to Kevin Richardson and Michael Thomas for a while, going into sort of 1991. Then he got his place in the side back, and it really spurred Arsenal on in 91. He was part of the double cup winning side in 93, part of the 94 cup winners side. So
he's a good player.
There was honours to go with it. There is an interesting story which might have an effect on why Davis didn't win an England cap. Well, there's two. One is the injuries that came afterwards, but it was an incident in 1988, which was 3 days after he was an unused substitute for England against Denmark, where he punched Southampton's Glenn Cockrell. He got an unprecedented, at the time, 9-match ban and a £3,000 fine. Donate that to the NHS, Davis. And he never got a look in again after that. So I don't know if it was a combination of the FA were like, not having any of that, mate. And because I think there was a lot more involvement in terms of the right players being in the squad then, ethically correct, etc.
Yep.
And then obviously he suffered with injuries as well. But even if you think back to that shit team that Graham Taylor took to 1992 in Sweden, like people like Davis would have been an improvement, mate, honestly. So he was one who he played for Arsenal for extremely long, basically his whole career, near enough. I think he was extremely unlucky. He had 12 under-21 caps as well, 1 B cap. As I said, he was on the bench that game against Denmark. He was in the squad several times. Another weird quirk that he just never made an appearance for the first team.
You put Jimmy Case into the team as well, 70s and 80s, probably most famous for his Liverpool career.
Yeah, most famous for his Liverpool career, but then when he left Liverpool in 81, he had 10 great years on the South Coast and was held in high regard by Brighton and Southampton fans. He was part of that Brighton side that lost to Manchester United in the FA Cup final at Wembley. But obviously, yes, remembered very fondly for the Liverpool team, particularly around about 77. Essentially, I don't know if a lot of people remember this, but obviously 22 years prior to Manchester United's 99 treble, Liverpool were very close to that. They were champions, but they lost the second of the 3 games to clinch it, basically, in the FA Cup final against United. Jimmy Case did score Liverpool's goal in that final. He then also played in the final of the European Cup, what we now know as the Champions League. A couple of days later when they beat Mönchengladbach in Rome. I think it was Mönchengladbach. It was the final they won in Rome anyway. Very good player, ferocious shot. Another one, just a weird quirk. If you think of someone playing for a team that's going for a treble and is English and he's a regular starter and he never got a call up. Weird.
The one thing with Jimmy Case, from what I heard, was that he was at Liverpool for 8 years. He only played a couple hundred times. So realistically, you're talking about, if you average it out, 15, 16 games a season. So either he was particularly stuck with injury or he wasn't good enough to be in the...
Well, I don't think he really broke in as sort of semi-first choice to around about 96. 76.
Six, yeah.
And then he obviously had a pivotal role in that side in 77. Shankly bombed him out, essentially, in the end, because he was a bit concerned about what he was doing with his social life. Again, right. It's an outside thing that might well have had an impact on a potential England call-up for him. But yeah, good left-sided player, gives this team a little bit of balance. I think he deserves his place in it.
Jimmy Greenhoff, a player that many won't have heard of, but if you're a real kind of historic football fan, jumps off the page as possibly one that would be first on this team.
Well, if I'd have picked this team blind, Jimmy Greenhoff wouldn't have been in it. But having done some research, there's a lot of people and journalists, etc., going back further, believe that he's near enough the unluckiest player never to play for England, basically. Played for Leeds, Birmingham. He had a very good spell at Manchester United late in the 70s. He also scored in that 1977 final. He scored a really important goal against Liverpool in a cup semi-final at Goodison. Probably perhaps most fondly remembered for his time at Stoke between 1969 and 1976. I saw a goal on YouTube while doing a bit of research, actually, that he scored for Stoke at Birmingham, which is very, very similar to Peter Crouch's goal for Stoke against Manchester City. It's an absolute welding.
Whack it, yeah.
But a lot of his goals, looking into the research, he was right place, right time kind of man. When he was at Leeds, he was basically a wide player, and Don Revie tried to convert him into a forward. He then had a short spell at Birmingham before going on to have that 7-year stay at Stoke, and he was just a regular in and about 15 goals for the season. Obviously, later had the England job briefly in 1976, and he called Greenhoff up to play for England against Wales in March of 1976. But Greenhoff was unable to play because it clashed with a league fixture.
Wow.
Can you imagine? Again, it's just another one now, 35 years later, you're going, call the league game off, man.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know whether it was a case they had to catch up on fixtures, and perhaps that's why it was rearranged to there. And then obviously that summer he then moved on to Manchester United. I think he's quite well regarded for his time at United as well. He had 5 caps at under 23 level, and I guess the fact that he was definitely going to play makes him a very unlucky player to have missed out. But a very consistent goal scorer in the 70s, particularly while at Stoke.
We've got a front two here, and 2 more modern players that a few people from recent times will remember. Kevin Campbell, Everton, Arsenal.
I ummed and ahed about this because I sent you a team yesterday and Kevin Campbell wasn't in it. But having looked into his backstory a little bit more, I've changed my mind and put him in. Obviously played for Arsenal, Forest, and he had a spell at Trabzonspor. He did unbelievably well when he came back originally on loan to Everton.
Yeah,
he came on loan to Everton. I think it was 98 or 99. I think it might have even been 2000. He came back on loan. He came to Everton on loan in March. He finished as Everton's top goal scorer. He got 8 in 6 or something to basically keep them up. And then he also assisted the West Brom side, which was the first one to be bottom of on Christmas Day and then stay up. But more fondly remembered by most people for his time at Arsenal. He'd scored 60 goals at Arsenal. He's also, I didn't realise he's actually got the most Premier League goals ever without winning an England cap. And obviously Campbell played for a good couple of years for Arsenal before the Premier League came into force. I remember him certainly scoring against Tottenham in 91, 92.
His partnership with Ian Wright is something that
he was unlucky at Arsenal as well because him and Smith had a good relationship with like Paul Merson and Anders Limpar. It was a good front four in the title-winning team of 1991. And then they went and bought Ian Wright when Campbell was emerging. And then you got Wright and Campbell, and Ian Wright was another one who he never got nearly enough England caps in terms of what his performances merited. But it was a time when you had Wright, Shearer, Ferdinand, Sheringham, Shearer, did I say Shearer? Robbie Fowler.
Yeah.
Like, there were so many knocking about that, again, the caps just weren't given away willy-nilly like that. If it's Stan Collymore in the mid-90s, we know Stan had his problems. Stan Collymore played once. He was class. He played once for England, mate. That's unbelievable. Stan Collymore now, in his peak, would walk in the England team.
Yeah.
He had that period sort of at Nottingham Forest and that. Stan obviously wasn't helped by outside things in his life. Campbell played 4 times for the under-21s, once for England B, and he was on standby for a squad against Spain in 1992, just after the European Championship failures in Sweden. So he was being considered. He just never got in. And I think he's a bit unlucky that he was at a period where, like I said, you had all those players at early to mid-90s that definitely would have been ahead of him.
No, for sure. And the last name on the team sheet, we've got Matt Jansen.
Yeah, this one's a little bit controversial in the sense that he obviously had a very short career. Matt Jansen didn't have the career that some of the others have had.
No.
But there's a real interesting story about Matt Jansen, and I didn't realise how bad it was, probably because I was 18 and I was drinking a lot at the time. But Matt Jansen, essentially, he had a real breakthrough at Carlisle. Then Crystal Palace bought him for $1 million in the late 90s. I think he played about 10, 12 games for Palace, and then Blackburn paid $4 million for him. Like, it was no joke. It was straight, get it done. He looked like a super talent. They beat off interest from Manchester United to buy him. And Blackburn went down, which wasn't Jansen's fault because he was still a young player. But then he had an exceptional season in the Championship in 2000, 2001, finishing second top goal scorer behind Fulham's Lewis Zaha. And then was part of the Blackburn team that not only stayed up, he scored in the Worthington Cup final victory over Tottenham. And then he was called up to the England squad for a friendly against Paraguay in April, prior to the 2002 World Cup. Sven-Göran Eriksson was going to play him. Jansen had to pull out with sickness. He had a stomach bug. And then Eriksson still decided that even though he hadn't capped him, he was going to take Jansen to the 2002 World Cup. Then had a late change of heart at the last decision in terms of what he wanted to do with his backup players and took Martin Keown instead as an extra defender. Martin Keown didn't play a minute at the tournament, and that's not to say that Matt Jansen would have, but certainly if he'd been in the squad, he probably would have at least played in a friendly in the build-up or something.
Maybe, yeah.
And then that summer, Jansen had a very serious motorcycle accident in Rome, and I didn't realise this, but he was actually in a coma for 6 days.
Wow.
And then came back, and obviously it took him a very long time to recover, and he just wasn't quite the same player. Blackburn gave him a number of chances in terms of, like, when he was unattached, they let him train with the club, and then they seemed to be signing him, not signing him, re-signing him. But he just obviously couldn't recover. But at that period, 01-02, if he'd not had that motorcycle accident, Matt Jansen certainly would have played for England on the other side, even though he hadn't got called up for that World Cup squad. Because unlike that 90s team, obviously this is before the emergence of Rooney, but in terms of Owen's partner, like, you still had Teddy Sheringham knocking about. He was incredibly old at this stage. Sheringham went to the World Cup at about 36, 37 or something. Emil Heskey, obviously, who was a great partner for Owen, but you could have seen Jansen was going to get a chance. Andy Cole was about as well, another one who didn't play for England. Should have mentioned him earlier with those 90 players. Another one who didn't get as many call-ups as he deserved. Jansen certainly would have got a chance if it wasn't for that motorcycle crash.
Yeah, very disappointing story. We put some 11s together. You put this 11 together, and it's good. It doesn't make me think, wow, okay, they're world beaters. But it's not a bad team at all. Maybe it's one of those where the sum of the parts might be greater than...
If I'm honest with you, if you dump that 11 all in their peak in the Premier League now, I don't know if they'd finish top 4. I don't think they would, probably.
And then, like you mentioned, a few other players that never made it. We talked about Mark Noble and Mickey Hazard, Chris Perry and Alan Wright you mentioned as well. And some older Dennis Mortimer and Gary Shaw you had down as well. All players that didn't quite make it for England. Yeah,
Chris Perry was particularly at Wimbledon. He was another one a little bit like Bruce. I think his lack of height really counted for him.
Affected him.
And he didn't do great at Spurs, but he had a good first few 6 months and it felt inevitable that he would get a call up. Now he was at a more established club like Spurs. And it never happened for him. I certainly remember going to Spurs and everybody screaming Perry for England, which was a kind of common chant when he wanted an England player called up then. Alan Wright, Aston Villa's a little bit lucky for a couple of reasons. Certainly from his period when he was at Villa, they had quite a good side, sort of around about 95, 96 was,
Yep.
I think it was around the top four, sort of Christmas time. He was unlucky in the sense that he was in competition with like Stuart Pearce and Graham Lasso at Blackburn. So unless there was injuries there, he was never going to get a look in.
No.
Mickey Hazard at Spurs was someone I wanted to put in the team, but looking back on his career, Mickey only made about 300 appearances, which really put me off as a midfielder in comparison to some of these other numbers we've mentioned, like Nolan, 400 plus just in the Premier League alone and that. But Mickey was particularly unlucky, not just for England, but also at Spurs, because obviously he had Glenn Hoddle in his way.
Yeah.
But when Glenn didn't play, Mickey Hazard stepped up and was the best player in the team. Hoddle's another one, under 60 caps. Like, it's astonishing. If it was now, he'd be 100, 120. But again, players like Hoddle and Hazard at that time were underappreciated in comparison to people who could do the box-to-box job, like Brian Robson, for example. So Hazard, from a technical point of view, I felt was good value, but probably not on the other stuff in terms of other people's achievements and how close they were to the squad. Mark Noble, I shortlisted, mate, just for longevity at West Ham, but I don't feel like he's ever been close.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
It's certainly not going to happen now. And there were two players from the Aston Villa 1982 European Cup winning team, and obviously the 98-1 league team, Dennis Mortimer and Gary Shaw, who played up front. Gary Shaw certainly did. Mortimer played in the midfield position. Who were two players you think league champions and then European Cup winners and never got a look in for England. So I felt they were worthy of a shout as well. Yeah,
no doubt about that. Of course, all of the listeners are going to have a bunch of players that we haven't mentioned that they may consider.
I'm not sure they are, mate. It's tough to.
Yeah, this one was a tough one.
Tony Hibbert. If I was gone 4-4-2, I really would have struggled for a right back. Tony Hibbert at Everton probably would have been near enough the best shout, but he was never close to an England call up either.
No. Yeah, you're right. You are indeed correct. So there you go to all the listeners that voted in the People's Poll. Here's a rundown of 11 players that would have made an England 11 of uncapped talent. We'll have another People's Poll for you next week. Options will go out on Sunday. Maybe we won't do an 11 this time. Maybe we'll do something different.
Yeah, we'll do something different.
Yeah, for sure. Guys, do stay tuned to Planet FPL on YouTube or your podcast, whatever you're using, whether it's iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, Acast, Google Podcasts, so on and so on and so on. Even our own app, if you go to the app stores on Apple or Google Play, you can download the app. We have tomorrow a quiz for you, hosted by none other than the mayor of FPL, utterly TC, Tom Campbell. You do want to make sure you tune into that.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, it's a good 55 minutes of entertainment. So
no, I don't think it's that long. 50
minutes then.
Yeah.
Around about 50 minutes. So do put aside an hour and do it with your mates. It's a decent quiz. It's not a straight 1 to 20. It's 35 points up for grabs. So make sure you get your pen and paper ready for that. On Thursday, we're looking back to a team in 1994 that didn't qualify for USA, the World Cup in America, and Graham Taylor's demise. So that will be our throwback this week. And on Friday, James will be live streaming again. He's really happy at home. He's got really, really fast broadband now. So just jump on the stream because we can handle as many people as you want. Not that your broadband makes any difference about how many people jump on the live stream, but do that. Are you streaming tomorrow night with Champman as well?
I will be doing that, and most probably on Saturday as well. And although I can't give the game away as well, I have personally lined up 3 guest appearances for myself on a few different platforms of other FPL content creators over the next week or two.
Good. And so if you follow James on Twitter at Planet FPL Pod, hit the little bell so you get the notifications. You'll get his tweet straight away when he does tell you or let you know where he's going and what he is doing. Other than that, it's a really nice sunny day. So if you've got the luxury
it looks great at Wembley behind you, Suj.
Yeah, it's lovely, jubbly. They've just mowed the lawn, just ready for us to have a kickabout, mate. So
are they not stacking it up with the lasagna? No,
not at the moment. No. I played that little WhatsApp to my son. He was wetting himself after lasagna. So yeah, do get out and about, get some fresh air, but do it safely in your garden. Don't get out and about being stupid. Wash your hands. Stay safe. We haven't forgotten that we're still in difficult times with COVID. Do what you can. And as James always says, well, I say ciao for now. You say,
be nice to each other, and cue music, man child.
Thank you.